Hi, my beautiful grandchildren. Today, I'm going to read Young Reader Classic Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Now, this is the only pictures you're going to see. The books I read don't have pictures. So, that'll give you an idea. Peter Breaks Through. Chapter 1. Oh, there's another picture. Chapter 1. All children, except one, grow up. They soon know that they all will grow up. And the way Wendy knew this was, one day, when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Miss Darling put her hand on her heart and cried, "Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?" This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Winnie knew that she must grow up. You always know after you're 2. 2 is the beginning of the end. Of course, they lived in a house number 14 on their street until Wendy came to her mother, was the chief one. She was a lovely lady, with a romantic mind, such a sweet mocking mouth. Her romantic mind was like the tiny boxes, one within the other, that came from a puzzling East. However, many you discover there is always one more, and her sweet mocking mouth had one kiss on it. That's Wendy's could never get, though there it was, perfectly conspicuous in the right-hand corner. The way Miss Darling won her was this. The many gentlemen who had been boys when she was a little girl discovered simultaneously that they loved her, and they all ran to her house to propose to her, except Mr. Darlington, who took a cab and nipped in first. And so he got her, and he got all of her except the innermost box and this kiss. He never knew about the box, and in it, time, he gave up trying for the kiss. Wendy thought, Neapolitan could not have gotten it, but I can picture him trying, and then going off in a passion, slamming the door. Mr. Darlington used to boast to Wendy that her mother not only loved him, but respected him. He was one of those deep ones who knew about stocks and shares. Of course, no one really knows, but he's quite seems to know, and he often said stocks were up and shares were down in that way, and that would make any woman respect him. Of course, no one really knows, but he quite seemed to know, and often, Miss Darling was married in white, and first she kept the books perfectly, almost gleefully, as if it were a game. Not so much as Brussels sprouts was missing, but by and by whole cauliflower drops out, and instead of them there were pictures of babies without faces. She drew them when she should have been totting up. They they were Miss Darling's guests. Company. Wendy came first with John, then Michael. For a week or two after Wendy came, it was doubtful whether they would be able to keep her, as she was another mouth to feed. Mr. Darlington was frightfully proud of her, but he was very honorable, and he sat on the edge of Miss Darlington's bed, holding her hand and calculating expenses while she looked at him imploringly. She wanted to risk it, come what might, but that was not his way. His way was with a pencil and a piece of paper. As if she confused him with suggestions, he had to begin at the beginning again. "Now don't interrupt," he would beg her. "I have £1.17 here, and 2 and 6 at the office. I can cut off my coffee at the office, say 10 shillings. Makes 2 9s and 6 with your 18, and 3 makes 3 9s, 17, with 5 not in my checkbook makes 18 9s, 7. Who is that moving? 8 9 7 dot carry 7 don't speak my own. And the pound you lent to the man who came to the door, quiet, child dot and carry child there. You've done it. Did I say 979? Yes? I said 977. 9. The question is, can we try it for a year on 997? Of course we can, George, she cried, but with prejudice in Wendy's favor, and he was really the grander character of the two. Remember Mumps? He warned her almost threateningly, and off he went. Mumps? £1? That is what I have put down. I put down, dare say, it will be more like the 30 shillings. Don't speak measles, 1.5. German measles, half a guinea. Makes 2 15 sixes. Don't wiggle your finger. Whooping cough. Say 15 shillings. And so on. It went, and it added up different each time. But at last, Wendy just had got through. With mumps reduced to 12 and 6, and the 2 kinds of measles treated as one. There was the same excitement over John and Michael, and even the narrow squeak, but both were kept as soon. And you might have seen the 3 of them growing in rows to Miss Folsom kindergarten school, accomplished by their nurses. Miss Darlington loved to have everything just so, and Mr. Darlington had the passion of being exactly like his neighbors. So, of course, they had a nurse, as they were poor, owing to the amounts of milk the children drank. The nurse was Prim, Newfoundland dog called Nana, who had belonged to no one in particular until the Darlings engaged her. She had always thought of the children important. However, the Darlings had come acquainted with her kinsman gardens, where she spent most of her spare time, peeping into the perambulums, perambulumtators, and was much hated by the careless nursemaids, who she followed to their homes and accompanied of their mistresses. She's a dog, just so you know. That's why all these weird words are coming in. She provided to be quite a treasure of a nurse. How thorough she was at bath time, and up at any moment of the night if one of her charges made the slightest cry. Of course, she's Colonel was in the nursery. She had a genius for knowledge when the cough is a thing to have no patience with, and when it needs stocking around your throat. She believed in her last day in old-fashioned remedies like rhubarb leaf and make sounds of contentment all over. All this newfangled talk about germs and so on, and was a lesson in propriety to see her escorting the children to school, walking steadfast side by side when they weren't behaving well, and butting them back into line if one strayed. On John's foot, in England soccer, it was called football, footer for short. The days never seemed once forgotten his sweater, and she usually carried an umbrella in her mouth in case of rain. There is a room in the basement of Miss Folsom's school where the nurse waits, that sat on forms while Nana laid on the floor, but that was the only difference. They affectioned to ignore her as of inferior social status to themselves. As she despised their light talk, she visited the nursery from Mrs. Darlington's friends. But if they did come, she first whipped off Michel's pinafore and put him into one of the blue braids and smoothed out Wendy's and made a dash at John's hair. No nursery could possibly have been conducted more correctly. Mr. Darlington knew it, yet he sometimes wondered uneasily whether the neighborhood talked. He had his position in the city to consider. Now also troubled him in another way. He had sometimes a feeling that she did not admire him. "I know she admires you tremendously, George," Miss Darlington would assure him. And then she would sign to the children to be especially nice to Father. Lovely dances followed, in which the only other servant, Liz, was sometimes allowed to join such a midnight. She looked in her long skirt and maid cap, though she had sworn when engaged that she would never see 10 again. Then Gantley, of those thrumps, and gayest of all with Miss Darlington, who would perolate with wildly that all you could see was her, that kiss, and then if you had dashed at her, you might have got it. There never was a simpler, happier until the comforting of Peter Pan. Miss Darlington, at first, heard of Peter when she was tidying up the children's minds. In the night custom of every good mother, after her children are asleep, to rummage in their minds and put things straight for the next morning, repacking into their proper places the many articles that have wandered during the day. If you could keep awake, but of course you can't, you would see your own mother doing this, and you would find it very interesting to watch her. It is quite like tidying up drawers. You would see her on her knees, I expect, lingering humorously over some of your own content, wondering where on earth you had picked this thing up, making discoveries, sweet and not so sweet, pressing this to her cheek as if it was nice as a kitten, or hurried storing that out of sight. When you wake in the morning, the naughtiness and the evil passions with which you went to bed had been folded up small and placed at the bottom of your mind. And on the top bureau, beautifully aired, are spread out your prettiest thoughts, ready for you to put on. I don't know whether you have ever seen a map of a person's mind? Doctors sometimes draw maps of their parts of you, and you draw maps, and you draw your own map, can become intensely interesting. But catch them trying to draw a map of a child's mind, which is not only confused, but keeps going around all the time. There are zigzag lines on it, just like your temperature on a card. There are possibly roads in the islands, for the Neverland is always more and less in the island, with astonishing splashes of color here and there, a coral reef and a ancient-looking craft in the offing, and the savages are lonely layers, are gnomes, who are mostly tailored, and caves through which the river runs, and princes with 6 elderly brothers, and a hunt fast going to the decay, and one very small old lady with a hooded nose. It would be as easily mapped as if there were all but there. And also a first day of school religion father, a round pond, needlework, murderers, hangings, verbs that take the date of chocolate pudding day, getting into braces, saying 99, 3 pences for pulling out of your tooth, yourself, and so on. And either of these parts of the islands, or they are another map showing that through it is all rather confusing, especially at nothing will stand still. Of course, Neverland's a very good deal. John's, for instance, has a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, at which John was shooting, while Michael, who was very small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. John lived in the boat, turned upside down on the sands. Michael in a wiggle worm. Wendy in the house of leaves, defying swine together. John had no friends. Michael had friends at night. Wendy had a pet wolf forsaken by the parents. But on the whole, the Neverlands have the family resemblance. As if they stood still in a row, you could say of them that they have each other's nose, and so forth. On these magic shores children played, are forever beaconing their simplest boats. We too have been there. We can still hear the sounds of the surf, though we shall land no more. Of all delectable islands, the Neverlands is the snuggiest and most compact. Not large or sprawly, with tendonitis distance between one adventure or another, but nicely crammed. When you play at it by day, with the chairs and the tablecloth, it is not the last alarming, but it is the 2 minutes before you go to sleep. It becomes very real. That's why there are night lights. Occasionally, in her travels through her children's mind, Miss Darling found things that she could not understand, and of these quite the most perplexing was the word Peter. She knew of no Peter, and yet here he was, and there in John's and Michael's mind, while Wendy began to scrawl all over with him. The name stood out in bold letters that any of the other words in Miss Darling's days. She felt that it had an odd cocky appearance. Yes, he's rather cocky, Wendy admitted with regret. Her mother had been questioning her. But who is he, my pet? He's Peter Pan, you know, Mother. At first Miss Darlington did not know, but after thinking back into her childhood, she just remembered of Peter Pan, who was said to live with the fairies. There were odd stories about him, and that when the children died, he went part of the way with them, so that they should not be frightened. She had believed in him at that time, but now she was married and full of sense and quite doubt whether there had been any such persons. Besides, she said to Wendy, he would be grown up by this time. Oh, no, he isn't grown up, Wendy assured her confidently. He is just my size, she meant, and that he was her size in both mind and body. She didn't know how she knew. She just knew it. Miss Darlington consoled Mr. Darlington, but smiled. Poor Pooh. Mark my words, he said. It is some nonsense Nana has been putting into their heads. Just the sort of idea a dog would have. Leave it alone. It will blow over. But it would not blow over, and soon the troublesome boy gave Miss Darlington quite a shock. Children had become straitened adventurers without being troubled by themselves. For instance, they may remember to mention a week after the event happened that when they were in the woods, they had met their dead father and had a name with him. It was in a casual way that Wendy one morning made disquieting revelations. Some leaves of a tree had been found on the nursery floor, which certainly were not there when the children went to bed, and Miss Darlington was puzzled over them. When Wendy said, with a tolerant smile, I do believe it is that Peter again. Whatever do you mean, Wendy? It is so naughty of him not to wipe his feet, Wendy said, sighing. She was a tidy child. She explained it was quite matter of fact what she said. Peter sometimes came to the nursery in the night and sat on the floor of her bed and played on his pipes to her. Unfortunately, she never woke, so she didn't know how she knew. She just knew. What nonsense are you talking, Precious? No one can get into my house without knocking. I think he comes into my window, she said. My love, this is 3 floors up. We're not the leaves on the floor of the window, Mother? It was quite true. The leaves had been found very near the window. Miss Darling did not know what to think, for all seemed so natural to Wendy, and you could not dismiss it by saying she had been dreaming. My child, the mother cried, why did you not tell me of this before? I forgot, said Wendy lightly. She was in a hurry to get breakfast. Oh, surely she must have been dreaming. But on the other hand, there were the leaves. Miss Darling examined them very carefully. They were skeleton leaves, but she was sure they did not come from any tree that grew in England. She crawled about the floor, peering in and watched the candle for a mark of a strange foot. She rattled the poker up the chimney and tapped the walls. She let down the tape from the windows to the pavement, and it was a sheer drop of 30 feet, without so much of a spot to climb. Certainly Wendy had been dreaming, but Wendy had not been dreaming, as the very next night showed, the night on which the extraordinary adventures of these children may be said had to begun. On the night we speak of, all children were once more in bed. It happened to be Nana's evening off, and Miss Darling had bathed them and sung to them till one by one they had let her hand go and slid away into the land of sleep. All were looking so safe and cozy, and she smiled, and her fears now had sat down tranquilly by the fire into so. It was something for Michael, who was on his birthday, was getting into his shirt. The fire was warm, however, the nursery dimly lit by 3 night lights, and presently by sewing laid on Mrs. Darling's lap. Then her head nodded, oh, so gracefully. She was asleep. Look at the 4 of them. Wendy, Michael over there, John here, and Miss Darling by the fire. There should have been a 4th night light. While she slept, she had dreamed. She dreamt that the Neverland had come too near, and that a strange boy had broken through it, from it. He had not alarmed her, for she thought she had seen him before in the faces of many women who have no children. Perhaps he is to be found in the faces of some mothers also. But in her dream, he had rent the film The Obscure, The Neverland, and she saw Wendy and John and Michael peeping through the gap. The dream by itself would have been a trifle, but while she was dreaming by the window of the nursery blew open, and the boy did drop from onto the floor. He was accompanied by a strange light, no bigger than your fist, which darted about the room like a living thing, and I think it must have been this light that awakened Miss Darling. She stared up, and with a cry, she saw the boy, and somehow she knew at once that that was Peter Pan. If you or I or Wendy had been there, we should have seen that he was very like Miss Darling's kisses. He was a lovely boy, clad in skeleton leaves and the juices that oozed out of the trees. But most enchanting thing about him was that he had all his first teeth. When she saw that he was grown up, he gashed at the little pearls at her. All right, that's all tonight. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2 tomorrow. I love you. Hope you enjoy it.